It takes a lot of commitment to delve into these aspects because it's not our culture, and to try to understand can be really difficult.
What I have found is that as I have dived deeper and deeper into this practice over the years, that there is just so much richness in that foundation.
Expand my mind by seeing through a different cultural lens.
Welcome, friends, to the Reiki Women Podcast, an exploration into the profound depths of the system of Reiki from a Japanese spiritual perspective and how that relates to our modern lives.
We are keeping it real to Reiki's origins, challenging the New Age stereotype that things like crystals, chakras, and angels are authentic aspects of the system. I'm Bronwyn Logan, and when I'm not writing best-selling books about the Japanese system of Reiki, 75,000 readers and counting, I'm here debunking outmoded Reiki myths and coaching individuals and groups through my website, Reiki with Bronwyn.
And I'm Mikayla Daystar, lead teacher and weaver of Heartscapes Reiki, connecting the dots between Reiki and environmental and social justice, because our individual healing cannot be extracted from healing relationship with the collective and with the land.
And I'm Carrie from the Reiki Healing Society, here to help you transform your Reiki practice into a thriving, prosperous business. Because while passion fuels your purpose, it's time to make it sustainable, authentic, and beautifully you. We're three women diving into the heart of Japanese Reiki. We're building a community that centers women's voices and inspires well-being. We're not just for women, we're for everybody. Come join the conversation.
Welcome. Today we're going to be looking at part of the system of Reiki that we often talk about a lot, but we're going to look at it from some very specific angles, and that is some of the Japanese influences that you might find to the system of Reiki within the Japanese culture. We've all got certain things that we enjoy working with. Some of these things actually are a part of the system of Reiki, but they also belong to the much wider social and cultural aspects of Japan. So for those of you who love those aspects, this will be a really great podcast today. And for those of you who don't know much about it, I hope you find something interesting and maybe get inspired to learn some other arts or find out a little bit more about Japan and how it influences the system of Reiki. So to start off, I'm going to ask Mikayla. Mikayla, tell us about your interest and in the system of Reiki from a Japanese perspective, and what do you work with, maybe with your students, maybe yourself?
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a juicy topic because it's so vast. And, the system of Reiki, of course, comes from these deep and wide traditions that are a alchemy of indigenous Shinto practice, Japanese Buddhism, the kind of alchemy of those things in the shamanic Shigendo practices, martial arts traditions, and then, of course, the wide range of arts that spring from those spiritual foundations. And the system of Reiki, among with many other kind of regional specific systems of practice that were developed during that same time period that Usui lived, is a distillation of those things and kind of presented in a way that's accessible, that's elegant, that's available to people who haven't, spent their lives deep diving the sutras and meditating on mountaintops, and who, need and can absolutely benefit from and practice those essence of those practices, and to do that in a way that's more available and accessible. So one of the things that's so delightful about the system of Reiki is its accessibility. And what I have found is that as I have, dived deeper and deeper into this practice over the years, that there is just so much richness in that foundation. You do not have to be a Buddhist. You do not have to be, deeply, again, you don't have to be one who has studied the sutras for, decades to appreciate some of these pieces. I do, however, before I give you some couple examples of some of my favorites, I do want to put a asterisk right there, though, and say that, we are talking about, and in my practice, working with some of these elements in a way that's kind of detached from their deeper religious contexts. And that's always going to give us an incomplete and, ultimately a little bit dissociated view of these elements. So I just want to acknowledge that off the top. Practicing mindfulness meditation is not the same as being a practicing Buddhist when we isolate it, for example, if we look at other traditions. So just want to acknowledge that. That said, there are I have studied Shingon Buddhism for several years. I have worked with some of these elements in my personal practice, and then I kind of have a collection of them that are my favorites, both because of just personally what they have done for me in my practice, and because of the specificity in which they relate to the system of Reiki specifically. So there's some practices from these origins that are more directly linked. Like you can say, okay, here's the dotted line that connects this practice in its original context to the system of Reiki, which grew from that context. And so that's kind of how I decided which among the many I would present to students. And for the most part, I am weaving those things in as we go along, but primarily focusing on them in Shinpiden Reiki 3 when students have already deeply immersed in their own Reiki practice. So all of that was a big preview, context setting for what are some of my favorites. So the two that kind of came up right away were two like deity practices that have been central to my practice. One is working with Fudo and one is working with the Medicine Buddha. And they speak to different aspects of the system of Reiki. With Fudo, we have a representation of the Buddha, the wrathful personification of Dainichi Nyorai, who is the central Buddha in Shingon and Tendai Buddhism. And he holds a variety of roles within that tradition. When we look at the connection to the system of Reiki, there are many ways that connection is made, but the one that is the most central and where I find the most value in working with Fudo is in seeing him as an ally and a helper and a teacher in clearing away the pathway to our true self. So if we say that, as we do many times in this podcast, that the system of Reiki in large part is designed to give us a pathway home to our true self, to our original energy, to that spark of life that is who and what we are at all times, not to go find it because it's been lost and it's no longer with us, but to clear away everything that's in the way that has caused us to forget that our original nature. So pathway back inside to our original nature, which involves clearing distractions, attachments, traumas, fears, beliefs, all of these things that we collect during our lifetime that are, not inherently bad. They're things that are just part of living a life in a complicated world, but that become debris in the way on that journey back to, really being able to land and live within and walk from our true self and our original energy. And so Fudo as a deity, as a personification of the Buddha, but also as a personification of aspects of each of us, which is kind of two different ways that we can look at these deities. We can absolutely look at them both of these ways. But one is like, this is a actual literal deity in the world. This is an energy that exists that has this personification about it. And or we can look at this as a reflection, a metaphoric reflection, an archetypal reflection of an aspect of our own self, that this image and this story and this being of the Buddha in his many manifestations gives us an external reflection of. So it doesn't really matter which way you hold that, or perhaps a little of both. Either way is valuable. As either of those things, Fudo is a energy that clears away that debris. And he does that by cutting away those attachments, those distractions, those limiting beliefs, those fears, those traumas, cutting them away from our true self, burning them in a cleansing fire, and pulling like a diamond out of the debris our spark of life, our true and beautiful and true self, so that we are less encumbered. Um, and that is, for me, a direct metaphoric archetypal application of the system of Reiki. For me, he almost like is the personification of the system of Reiki because of those functions. And he functioned that way for me for quite some time, several years in my practice. And at a certain point, I wanted to really dig more into understanding him a little bit better in his original context. And I did find a documentary film that was created in Kyoto about Fudo. And unfortunately, this is so sad. It's out of print and no longer available on the internet. I even wrote to the production company. It's like, could I get a copy of that episode of your documentaries? And they're like, no, it's gone. Very sad because it presented this really beautiful look at the relationship that people who work with Fudo as a primary deity in their Buddhist practice, the relationship that they have with him, this loving, kind, connected relationship, viewing him as not only a guide or a protector, but as like almost like a family member who fiercely loves us and will defend the purity of our soul with everything he's got. And when I say fierce, I do mean fierce, because if you look up images of Fudo, and I recommend that you do, his visage, his appearance is fearsome. He's got a growling, fanged face. He's scowling. He's, deep azure blue. He's got this sword. He's engulfed in flames with phoenixes writhing within the flames. And he's got this rope in his hand that's ready to lasso that diamond of your true self and pull you out of there. And he's sitting on a plinth of stone, this firm foundation, this mountain body. And he's a very fearsome image. And it was so powerful and lovely to see the paradox of people describing an image like that as a kind and loving family member. And that fierceness was such a comfort to them because of knowing the strength that he was bringing to that deep compassion. He loves us so much that he's willing to dedicate everything to it. And I can show you one image because he's actually lives here on my arm. Just my Fudo Myo tattoo. I am one of those, annoying white ladies with a Buddhist figure tattooed on me. And I got this piece after many years working with him and, with a lot of mindfulness, and put it there on my left arm so that I could bring him to my heart easily, because I have found that my relationship with him is very much as the people in the documentary described, this feeling of being lovingly and fiercely cared for by perhaps an energy in the world, a deity, and also by an aspect of my own self that exists and that I have access to through these practices. So that was the one that came up most strongly. That's probably the element of Japanese Buddhism that most strongly is part of my personal practice and part of my teaching, among many others. But I think that is quite enough from me to begin with, and I would love to pass it over to Carrie.
Oh, I just love that context, and I love that description of Fudo, and always learn so much about. I'm learning more and more about him, and I love the way you describe that. So thank you for that. Yeah, for me, inside of my Reiki courses, what I've really found is that through my journey with Reiki, it's this cultural and spiritual context of the Japanese culture, their spirituality. And that Reiki has really been extracted from that, right? And, especially in certain different lineages of Reiki, but certainly like Western Reiki, right? And that extraction really comes from ignorance, because as white people, we've been fairly ignorant about the Japanese culture. And, there have been amazing Reiki practitioners such as Bronwyn who have really confronted that ignorance and sought to do better. And, that was also has been part of my journey with Reiki, right? Is to recognize like all the things that I don't know, and start to educate myself and learn more about my beloved practice of Reiki and give myself that deeper context. And so, definitely been a journey for me. I think I've pieced it together some through my studies with, traditional Reiki practitioners. I got a chance to travel to Japan, which was huge, and had that, like kind of real life experience of Japan and, that bigger context, right? Is that you just really can't take Reiki out of that context without misrepresenting it in some ways or not really understanding it very deeply. So the aim of a lot of my, one of my goals in a Reiki training is to make those reconnections of the Japanese culture of, provide a deeper context. So, one of the things that I do is I just talk about the whole history of Japan. We start from ground zero and I just go through the whole history because that's something that I've had to learn over the years. And it didn't make sense to me for the longest time. And so finally, I've just like, what makes more sense to me is to start from the beginning. Let's start from the beginning, look at the history of Japan from a deeper context, and then put Reiki inside of that context, right? So that's kind of one of the goals that I do in Reiki 1 is kind of, and so to me, then also I talk about the roots of Reiki. So these origins of Reiki, where do these threads of Reiki, where did they really begin? And then how did the founder of Reiki really weave them together into his own cohesive system? So kind of start to introduce that to my students in Reiki 1. But I love where you went, Mikayla, and this is kind of where I go in Reiki level 2 for my students, is that I talk about the whole pantheon of Japanese Buddhas. And I think it's really important to understand the spiritual context and the spirituality of Japanese traditions because Reiki is a spiritual practice, right? And, I don't think anybody's talking about Fudo. I don't think anybody's talking about Dainichi Nyorai. I mean, maybe us inside of this context, but as a larger Reiki community, very few people are in touch with that Japanese spirituality. Yeah. And so, when I see people saying, "Oh, I'm talking to my Reiki guides," and all that, well, little did you know. Do you know what the Reiki guides are? Because there are, really profound, Buddhas and energies and consciousness that you can tap into. And I love the way you frame that, Mikayla. You can think of it as some reflection of yourself, or you can think of it as like an actual deity, like dwelling in the clouds. And there's probably plenty of ways of interpreting that, and I always leave that open to my students' interpretation. I think it's really important for them to find their own truth, but inside of the context of Reiki, I think it's, especially learning Reiki, it's really important to bring that forward. I find that it's very important. And so I do a deeper dive into that, and I love that. I love it, and I like love the energy that I feel like really gets, and gets people very excited to learn more and to understand more. And then the other element that I mean, there's probably many that I bring in, but I love calligraphy. So, and this came from traveling to Japan. So I went to Japan. I went to a temple called the Moss Temple, where there's like, I don't know, hundreds of different types of moss in this temple. And it's truly one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to. And one of the practices that you do at the Moss Temple is there is a big temple there. Um, and it's inside of the temple is this beautiful abstract art. And actually, I'm gonna have some pictures. Let's see. Pictures. Pictures are worth 1,000 words. But here's an image of the Moss Temple, and it's just totally like everything is in this beautiful, gorgeous emerald green there, And here's a picture of it, in the fall. And so but inside the temple is these Japanese screen doors, and on this Japanese screen doors is this gorgeous abstract art, and it's just gorgeous, beautiful, modern art, which is kind of unique. And anyway, so the practice that you do at the Moss Temple is you sit, and you are given a paper of the sutra associated with that temple. And unfortunately, I'm not familiar with exactly what sutra it is. But you're given a calligraphy pen and you trace the sutra, and that's a meditative practice. So you start with a gasho, and then you kind of enter into a meditation, unique meditation. So anyways, I've adopted this practice and brought it in with the precepts. So I have my students, they get a calligraphy pen, and we just have a moment of appreciation for the strokes of the the Reiki symbols in the precepts a couple times, and learning how to draw draw Japanese calligraphy and Japanese kanji, which is nicely settled in that part of the course because they're learning the Reiki symbols too, and so they're learning how to write them, and it just ends up being such a deep practice, and we talk about chanting the Reiki symbols, or I'm sorry, the Reiki precepts, right? And one of the reasons why we chant them is to invoke their original energy. And so I think also writing it, brings up that original energy where we just get to really feel like, oh, there's this like a deeper perspective that here I'm touching and I'm holding like this lineage of people who created this system. There's this larger cultural context of the Japanese culture and tradition, and yeah, just being able to sit and witness that and have a little experience with it, I think, is something that just I'm grateful that I get to give that to my students. And many teachers have given that to me in different ways and different things, and then I get to weave it together in terms of how I present it to my students too. So I'd love to hear from you, Miss Bronwyn Logan. I bet you have some wonderful things that you weave into your courses.
I love all that. It's beautiful. Thank you both. It takes a lot of commitment to delve into these aspects because it's not our culture, and to try to understand can be really difficult. I think you've both done a great job with that. I love, Carrie, that you were saying about that you teach about all the different deities, because I do a little bit of that in my classes, and I know how it can feel like it's something outside of ourselves rather than a part of ourselves. And Mikayla, you were talking about with Fudo as well, how it was a part of yourself. And I love that. If we can in some way get that sense inside of ourselves of the point of these deities or our understandings and bring it into our life, like the precepts, that it's something that we function from, then we're going to have a really deeper understanding and a deeper practice from that. I'm going to talk about the Japanese Waka, so the Japanese poems, because for me, these are actually a part of the system of Reiki, but they do come from a certain era. So that era hasn't necessarily replicated itself either into our modern practices as much. I think today people who are interested in the Japanese origins are much more open to the idea of something like waka. If you think of Japanese poetry, we'll often think of something like haiku. I can't think of a haiku, but there's lots of them, and there's short, and they're 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables, so 3 lines. And they're great fun and easy to write. And I know they have haiku competitions around the world. And so that is a Japanese practice that is definitely translated across into the more Western world, and something that we appreciate, this idea of having a very structured, simple boundary guidelines that we have to follow to create something from. And haiku has actually come out of waka. So waka poetry is 5, 7, 5, the same as haiku, but then there's another 7 and 7 syllables, so 2 extra lines at the bottom. And historically, where that comes from in Japan, well, waka means Japanese song. So it is actually sung in more ceremonial ways today in Japan. If you were to go to like a royal event, someone is going to be actually singing these waka, these poems. So they are used today, but in a limited way. And there's a lot of different stories of where it comes from, the actual idea of waka within Japan. There was a princess waka, apparently. And there was some story about that she used to write these poems and she wrote a love song. And that was the very first waka that has existed. But throughout time, that in Japan, waka have been used in different ways, and they've always been used by the more upper echelons of society because it was a way of showing your intelligence and your education. And they would write these poems in ways of competing with each other. So sometimes they would say the first three lines, so the 5, 7, 5, like the haiku, and one group would say those lines, and then another group would have to finish off the poem with the other 7 and 7. So there's lots of different ways of working with these poems, and the emperor would say who had actually won the poem. Yeah. So who'd made the best poem? There was a lot of those competitions. And I know of a professor in England who has translated over 2,000 of those poems. So there's a lot historically in Japan to do with all of this. However, if we are to look at the system of Reiki, what on earth do we have to do with that? Mikao Usui, born in 1865, and born into an era that was the Emperor Meiji's time. And the Emperor Meiji opened up Japan. The Emperor Meiji, he brought back Shintoism as a state religion. And he was very, in that sense, very nationalistic. He wrote poetry. And if you've been listening to any of our podcasts, I've probably brought it up before, but this is one of the books that has been written today about his poems. And this is the one of his wives, so the Empress Shokan. So both of them have these books today written of their poems in English. Yes. So
Bronwyn, can you
we're
say the
lucky.
names? Can you say the names of those books? They were a little blurry in the
Yeah.
image.
Well, yep. So the one for the one for the Emperor Meiji is Bridge on the Shikishima Way, 100 Poems, translated by Harold Wright, 92-year-old American. Thank you, Harold. And that is sort of like a life's work. I think it took him 30 years to translate. And that came out last year, and this year, this one came out, which is the Empresses. And he's just said Meiji as composed in elegant verse. And there's another 100 poems by her in that one. So those poems have been very lovingly translated by Harold Wright. And he actually has a little introduction at the beginning where he talks about the poems, where they come from, the ideas behind them, about the emperor and the empress. So that's all very beautiful. But still, what does this have to do with the system of Reiki? I'm not getting there very quick, am I? The emperor of the time, he wrote these poems, and it became a thing for martial artists, for example, to recite these poems, to chant these poems. It became a part of their practice. And it became a part of a spiritual practice. And I can understand why. If we actually look at the poems, they are often about nature. They're often very deep. They're not just something light. Within them, there is a lot of depth that can be found. And if we look at Mikao Usui and his time, we know that he did actually practice them. And we know that because of the people around him and what they have said. So, for example, Toshihiro Oguchi, who was a fellow practitioner in a spiritual practice and is said to have studied with Usui and also had his own practice. He had a whole community called the Ituan community. He had 7 principles for living. Number 6 was to read Japanese poetry, the waka specifically by the Emperor Meiji. And then there were other practitioners at that time. Koshi Mitsui, he was a practitioner of, uh, you could say, Reiki, the same type of practices that we're doing today. And he wrote books about Waka. So he was very into writing the poetry himself and also putting that out there in books. And he also wrote books with Toshihiro Oguchi. Then there was another student of Usui's, Kaji Tomita. And this is a book that around 2000 was republished in Japan. And that is the book by Kaji Tomita. And in it, Kaji Tomita talks about a practice called Hatsureiho. Now, any of you who've done Reiki practices before, you know Hatsureiho. And it is our fundamental practice of meditation practice within the system of Reiki. And in Kaji Tomita's version, there is the chanting of poetry and contemplation of poetry, this specific Emperor Meiji poetry. We also know that the Usui Reiki Ryoho Gakkai, so the association in Japan that was possibly started by Usui or started by his students, his naval students, that they would recite waka before Reiju was performed. So we can see it just everywhere. We have a manual of the Gakkai, which has 125 of the waka in the back of it. When we saw that manual years ago, we didn't really know how it was used. Now we know more how it's used, especially after looking at this book by Kaji Tomita. We can see that it definitely was a part of the system, but as it's come across to the West, it's sort of got lost. And even in Japan today, waka's not really popular, like I said, used in ceremonies. But for me personally, I love it. And I think that it can give us great insight. And I just thought I'd just give one little poem while we're here. And this is by the Empress. This is the poem. If just neglected and never polished to a glow, even precious jewels would remain resembling dull roof tiles made of clay. So if you were to contemplate that, you would read it a couple of times, yeah? And then you would start thinking about all the different aspects of it. So what would the precious jewels be in your life? What's this idea of polishing? What would be something that you could do to polish your jewels? So there's all different ways you can just pull it out and tease it out. And there is a lot that you can get out of it. And that's with all those poems. And I think it's a great way to actually work on yourself. I think I've said enough.
I love that so much, Bron. Just the whimsy of bringing poetry in to spiritual practice. And the first time I learned that was from you in a class that you did that included a lot of waka. And one of the practices that you taught in that class I've used ever since. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Carrie, I also am curious, since you were telling us about calligraphy, what the calligraphy piece is that's on the wall behind you, if you don't mind
Oh
sharing.
yeah, that is the Heart Sutra.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, no. So, um, yeah,
Well, one of the things that I know and have just been reminded of in this conversation is that, you know, in addition to teaching the core Reiki classes, this wealth of richness that is available to us here has inspired all of us to create other types of offerings. And so I'd love to just take a pause here and see what's coming up for each of us. Anything that you want to share that might be coming down the pike. Maybe it's been inspired by these foundations of Reiki. Maybe it is something completely alongside from another place. But what you got cooking in your cauldron at the moment? I'll pass it to Bronwyn first.
Oh, well, look, I'm not going to say at the moment, but I just spent so long talking about Waka. You guys have to do my Waka course, right? So I have a 21-day Waka class, and it actually takes you through different poems by both the Emperor and the Empress, and it takes you through meditations. There's a audio taking you through meditations with these poems, contemplations, also information. Each day you receive a little more information about Waka, where it comes from, how it's used, and it also develops the practice that I was just talking about by Kaji Tomita. so that by the 21st day, you have this complete practice and you can actually do this whole version of Hatsureiho. So Hatsureiho means generating greater amounts of energy in the body. And Kaji Tomita really believed that you could do that within a short period of time, simply, really, by sitting in meditation and focusing on self-awareness through Waka. So it's a really special class. And you can find that on my homepage, reikiwithbronwyn.com.
That's a self-paced class that people can take anytime.
It is. Thank you for adding that.
Yeah. What you cooking up, Carrie?
Oh man, that Waka, I'm gonna take that course soon enough. I haven't. It's been on my to-do list. Not to say that it's something that like I need to accomplish or anything. It sounds like so lovely, and thank you so much for that bigger context because yeah, well, maybe I'll talk more about it when I'm not talking about my current offerings, but let's see. So right now is I've been really enjoying this energy because I've been studying Vedic astrology. And so I'm always curious about how we can bring two modalities that touch one another in some way, like how we can bring them together meaningfully in a way that kind of protects and, honors their different cultures, perspectives, spiritual experiences. But one of the ways that Vedic astrology, which comes from India, and the Vedas are like the Bible of Hinduism. But bringing together also the Reiki and Vedic astrology both speak so wonderfully about finding your purpose and do it through different methods and through different means. And so I really believe that we need more people living their purpose and not feeling so confused about what that purpose might be. And reminding ourselves, too, that there's this humility and humbleness around our purpose as well, that we're always learning and growing into it. And sometimes it's related to how we make money, sometimes it's not. And anyway, so I've been offering a 5-session package, weaving Vedic astrology and Reiki together in this larger context of just helping people really connect and deeply nurture their purpose and feel more aware and conscious of what their purpose is, and use these practices to help them make their lives more beautiful and more aligned and more meaningful. So yeah, and that's just an ongoing offering, so anytime you'd like to connect to your purpose, I'd love to support you in that. What about you, Mikayla?
That's so lovely. Yeah, well, I have got a class coming up that weaves together my two very favorite practices, the ones that are absolutely the bedrock of my evolution as a human, which is, of course, the system of Reiki and the system of SoulCollage. And SoulCollage is actually the system of practice that I learned first. It was really the first system of practice that I fully learned, integrated, took on as a self-practice for my own personal transformation and healing, and then ultimately learned how to teach others. Reiki came along aside that. But what I discovered as I dug into Reiki in the way we're discussing it, not so much in my Western Reiki training, but once I shifted over to this perspective, is that SoulCollage and Reiki have the same purpose: to help us remember the wholeness of our true self, to acknowledge the many different parts of ourself, to come to understand them, to befriend them, to cleanse them, to heal them, so that we can feel like a more integrated whole being. And SoulCollage is, as it sounds, a practice of intuitive collaging, basically creating an image and giving a voice to different aspects of ourselves so that we can come to understand ourselves and what's happening back in the subconscious of our mind at all times without our awareness. So this particular class, and I've blended those two practices together in many ways. And actually, we just finished the final retreat for my 9-month Reiki program. And when I asked my students what they would like to experience, they requested a SoulCollage session. So we had a wonderful Reiki-based SoulCollage session yesterday. But for this class that's coming up, which is called All Souls on Deck, It's looking at the fact that we are in a time of great transition. There's a lot of change, a lot of challenges happening in the world, in the United States, for those of you living here, and in many people's personal lives, and that these times of change and upheaval and transformation have many challenges. They also have many opportunities. And what can be difficult in being able to perceive and act on those opportunities is when we don't feel resilient, when we feel that we're just being tossed around by the winds of change and we're just in reaction mode, and we're probably a little bit triggered or traumatized. Our nervous systems are all messed up, and it can become very, very challenging to really be able to move and respond and move towards possibility when we're in that state. And so the system of Reiki gives us an incredible structure, an incredible map for how to retain our resilience and our flexibility and our firm structure in the midst of change. And that is the 3 diamonds energy map, which we have spoken of at length here on this podcast. So I'm going to take that 3 diamonds energy map that really channels the energies of being grounded and focused, being spacious and open to possibility, and being courageously, compassionately connected. And use the system of SoulCollage to help us get in touch with aspects of ourselves that are those things and that maybe are struggling with those things. And over the course of this 5-class experience, create pathways to connect more deeply with those aspects of ourselves using collage and Reiki practices. So all souls on deck, which is a line that comes from a beautiful essay by Clarissa Pinkola Estes that is our structure for this class, will be coming up, I believe, starting June 14th. And that will be online and live online. So that's
what do you use for the collage?
Yeah, I should have been more prepared and have one, but you use basically a piece of mat board that's 5 by 8 inches, so they're about this big. You're essentially creating an oracle deck, many cards representing different aspects of yourself, but instead of an external oracle like the tarot, this is an internal oracle. You're making your own meaning. It's representing aspects of you, and of course, you in relationship to the world. So it's basically an 8 by 10 mat board that you could get at a framing shop, cut in half to make the board, and then you're just cutting and pasting and gluing things from magazines and making your collage. Yeah. All right. Well, should we talk about a couple more influences on our Reiki practice that come from the origins? There was one more I had on my list to talk about.
Go for it.
Yeah. So the other deity that I work with pretty extensively in my personal practice, and then that I teach, there are others that are with me, but the 2 that are kind of central, Fudo and then the Medicine Buddha. And for me, the way that the Medicine Buddha really anchors me into my Reiki practice in this structurally in the same way that I described Fudo, both as a representation of an energy in the world, potentially a deity that exists. I'm a little bit agnostic on that question. Actually, I'm a lot agnostic on that question. I don't know if there are actual gods and goddesses and Buddhas out there in the ether. But what I do know is that they do also represent aspects of our own self, that they are, allegorical, metaphoric, representations of different sides of ourselves. So the Medicine Buddha, we have a representation of the aspect of each of us that has deep capacity for healing, that you are your own healer, that there is a pathway through any illness. That pathway won't necessarily look the way that we want it to look or that we think it should look, but there is a way in which we can come to resolution and healing around whatever that thing is. And for me, this is so profoundly and directly connected to the fundamental premise of the system of Reiki, like fundamental belief, mindset, perspective that Reiki is what you are, that it is inside of you all the time, and that therefore the capacity to heal is not coming from somebody else giving you a Reiki treatment. That person is holding and creating a container for that healing that is already in you to take place. that medicine is already present inside of you. And we see that inside of the precepts. If you look at the preamble to the precepts, the little bit of writing before the just for today's, it identifies, the precepts and therefore Reiki as the medicine to, heal all illnesses. That this is what can address all ills of the body, the heart, the mind, and the spirit. And that's a mighty vast claim, right? That these precepts and therefore this system of practice that they represent is the secret to healing all illness. And, so it's an inquiry that we get to be in. Is that true? Do we believe that? Do we experience it to be true? And the Medicine Buddha represents that. It gives us this beautiful, just lavishly beautiful imagery. The imagery of the Medicine Buddha is probably my favorite imagery of a god or goddess that there is. Just absolutely stunningly beautiful and abundant with life. There's, he's surrounded by chrysanthemums, and there's, deer frolicking in the field behind him. And there's, flowers and plants and trees and a beautiful sky with puffy white clouds. And it's just this gorgeous representation of, paradise, really. And then the invitation is to imagine that paradise actually exists inside of you and also around you and in the universe all around. And then the Medicine Buddha holds this beautiful pot of medicine, this bowl of medicine with a beautiful herb growing from it that I believe is based on a medicinal herb that is indigenous to Japan. Or no, it wouldn't be indigenous to Japan, would it? It would be indigenous probably to India. And there's two mudras associated with the Medicine Buddha, either the no fear mudra, the hand held here, or the hand held low towards his waist with palm outstretched, again, facing outward, but facing downward, which is a gesture of giving of medicine. And so there's this invitation to receive medicine from this imagery. But again, remembering that this being, this giver of medicine, this incredible healer is in fact within you and is a part of you. And as is often the case with these deities, with these imagery, there is a mantra associated with the Medicine Buddha, as there is with Fudo, and there is a specific guided meditation that has you imagine, coming face to face with Medicine Buddha and merging together, becoming one being, one and the same, and expanding outward, encompassing all things, expanding out to the edge of the universe, with the implication that this medicine that is the secret to healing all illness is not only within you, but it is also available to all things. And when you complete that meditation and you again separate, you find yourself holding that pot of medicine that the Medicine Buddha carries. And this sequence of imagery of this contemplative experience of merging with the Medicine Buddha, finding that part inside of you that is abundant with this medicine of the universe, and then being able to share that generously outward with no fear, I have found to be powerfully uplifting, incredibly motivating and buoying to my practice. And it has had that same impact on my students. It's absolutely one that moves people quite deeply when we work with this material. And we work with that material in the central section of my Reiki 3 Shimpidan class, which is divided into 3 sections that works with these different elements. And so we just recently got to work through that unit. And so I still feel all aglow with my recent encounter with the Medicine Buddha. And it really is one that's worth just engaging visually. Again, just the imagery of Medicine Buddha is stunning. From whatever tradition it is represented through, the Japanese versions, Indian versions, just absolutely stunning. And then, if one wishes to dive into those layers of meaning and of application to our own contemplation and to our practice, and therefore to our our healing. But kind of bringing it back to Reiki again, just representing that fundamental worldview, that belief, that perspective that we are our own healer, which is not the perspective in every tradition, right? There are definitely traditions that I have trained in, that I've experienced, where the perspective is that healing is facilitated by others. And it is an incredibly powerful mindset shift to seek that pot of medicine, that source, the secret source of medicine that cures all illness within one's own self. And that is what the Medicine Buddha does for us. And that is the contribution that that tradition has made to the system of Reiki. And I love it. Did you find us a picture? Did you find us an image?
I did. I found a picture.
Yay.
I needed to. So I loved this. I found this recently, and I am so obsessed.
I had that one.
Oracle deck
I've got that
with
too.
the esoteric Buddhas of Japan, and it has, like they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. But this is the picture of the medicine Buddha, and
mine is upstairs, but I've got it too.
Oh my God, Solstice says yours is on order. And then I'm trying to find one for Fudo as well. I haven't found it yet.
Yeah, he's in there too. He's in the front part.
Yeah, I've got him in another space,
There he
but
is.
yeah,
Here he is.
yeah, I love that one. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, anyways, and it's the imagery and the symbolism and all of that. Like it's it has its own language, I think, and I think when we listen to it again, like whether or not you're seeing it from an agnostic perspective or from a very spiritual, like I'm going to worship Fudo, or that there's something we could really gain from it. And even if just it's a broader understanding of other spiritual cultures and spirituality of Japan. So important. So, and I just wanted to mention too, thank you so much for all of that historical context, Bronwyn, about the Waka poems, because I just love them. And I know that they've been in the Hike, like, this manual provided by the Gakkai, but it's so good to have that context. And I thought I'd refer our listeners to a very older episode of the RWP, but we talk about poetry and the system of Reiki, and that was a really lovely episode. And maybe sometime soon we should just have an episode where we just talk about our old episodes. And I know that I'm sure we have some new listeners who probably haven't been with us since the beginning, and I don't know, we're on like 170 episodes at this point, right? So I'm sure you haven't caught all of them, but that was one that for you to revisit if you that topic. Yeah, for me, I think one of the things that this topic has inspired is just to mention that I offer an additional Reiki course. So I do Reiki level 1 through 3, and I teach that in a really traditional form. I don't add, besides just like more context and more understanding, and there is a deep connection to a Japanese Buddha with each of the symbols, for example. So I tried to just elaborate on that and bring that forward. But I gave myself the creative freedom to create a new course called Advanced Reiki Training, and it's a 2-day course where I just bring some of the elements of the Western form of Reiki that I feel like are really helpful and just useful and knowledgeable. And I think it's important as Reiki practitioners, and kind of depends on your perspective, but not to have like these blinders on about that there's other things in the world of energy medicine and healing that might be very useful. So just wanting to support particularly other Reiki practitioners who want to deepen their practice. So we do a whole day of Western Reiki techniques, and then I do a whole day of Japanese techniques. And one of the things that we talk about in that is non-duality, going much deeper into non-duality, trying to really understand what non-duality is, engaging some practices with it. And then I also bring in the 5 healing elements as they're understood from the Japanese perspective. And I even bring forward some indigenous practices around reciprocity and right relationship that kind of weave into Buddhist concepts of right relationship as well. So yeah, I don't know. I just feel like the thirst is ongoing for understanding these cultural roots, but then also just really sitting with the beauty of these practices. And I think, Mikayla, you mentioned some of the, intellectual or spiritual struggles of it in some senses, is that, we're not part of that culture. I'm not a practicing Buddhist, so I don't bring forward that perspective, but I do bring a perspective of just appreciation for these cultures, a deeper understanding, um, and trying to just like put ourselves in the shoes of somebody else's worldview. And to me, that is like profoundly learning. Like I learned so much from that. Like I learned so much from other people, um, and expand my mind by seeing through a different cultural lens. And so I'm loving this conversation today. And Bronwyn, I'd love to pass it over to you. What else would
Yeah.
you like?
Well, I mean, there are so many aspects, and I love that word you just used, Carrie. It's an appreciation, and it's lovely to be able to appreciate the world, right? And yes, I want to appreciate everything, but I am fortunate in that I have a specific interest, right? And that interest we can then really focus in on and delve into more deeply, and I love that. So I did write a little blog recently called "The Hidden Wisdom in the Usui Memorial Stone," and it sort of comes to what we're talking about today. When I looked at the memorial stone, the actual memorial stone, and it's all written with all this kanji, that the kanji for Rei kept coming up the whole time through. So Rei, as in Reiki, but also Rei Ho. So if we think of the word Rei, it means spiritual, and you've both spoken to that. And I love that this practice is a spiritual practice. And I was thinking about what that might mean for us as practitioners. And in the article, I was saying there's like two worlds of spirituality, if you like, within the system of Reiki. And we have sort of talked a bit about that today. So there are different ways of approaching spirituality. And within the system of Reiki, the way that it is approached is that it's from within. So it's not an external thing. It's just the article just looks at different comparisons. So, for example, in the West, we tend to think of like God as or heaven, and we have all these ideas, but they are external from us. There's nothing wrong with this. It's just a different way of seeing things. And in Japan, though, it is about finding this aspect within ourselves, this healing within ourselves, which you've both spoken to. And this spirituality that is something within us that when we practice, we are developing and working on. And it is, as you said, Mikayla, it's that medicine that we're finding within ourselves. So it's not something outside, but something within. So we're working from different sort of angles, if you like. And for me, that's a really important part of the Japanese aspects of the system of Reiki and how we think about our practice and how we work. Have a read of that article, anyone, if you're interested a little bit more about that subject, as I sort of do comparisons between Japanese practices and more Western practices within the system of Reiki. I have loved the conversation today, and it's so beautiful to touch on these different elements. And every discussion that we have gives me a greater understanding of my own practice, and I love that very much. Thank you for that. If you're out there listening to this, please press subscribe, get notifications, do those things wherever they are. And we love doing this, and we love to have you here with us delving into these different aspects of the system of Reiki. So thank you very much. Thank you, Carrie, for being here, Mikayla, and we'll see you all next week. Lots of love. Bye.